In the quiet outskirts of Richmond, London, a hidden Georgian estate whispers of stories untold. Its red brick facade has seen decades pass, but today, it belongs to a man who once shattered guitars and rewrote rock history. Pete Townshend, the fierce mind behind The Who. What kind of home does a visionary like him retreat to after the roar of sold-out stadiums fades? Today, we step inside the gates of this timeless English country house and discover the fortune, lifestyle, and soul of a legend. He was born in Chiswick, West London, into a family steeped in music but fractured by chaos. Pete Townshend's earliest memories weren't of lullabies or warm embraces, but of separation. His father, Cliff Townshend, was a saxophonist for the Royal Air Force's Squadronaires. His mother, Betty, sang for orchestras on the side. But behind the music, the marriage was a storm of absence, infidelity, and alcoholism. At barely 2 years old, Pete was sent away to live with his grandmother, a woman he would later describe as certifiably insane. Can a child raised in that much turbulence find harmony later in life? Years passed under Emma Dennis's unstable roof, shaping a young boy's inner world with loneliness and imagination. When his parents eventually reunited and brought him back to Acton, Pete found some solace, but not belonging. Bullied for his looks, isolated in school, he often escaped into the pages of Treasure Island and Gulliver's Travels, or stared out the window dreaming of another life. Then came the summer of 1956. He watched Rock Around the Clock over and over during a family trip to the Isle of Man. Something shifted. Rock and roll had found him, and it would never let him go. That Christmas, his grandmother gave him a cheap Spanish guitar. No one knew it yet, but it was the first domino in a line that would shape modern rock. Pete began to teach himself chords. He didn't know how to read music, but he had something else: a restless soul and ears tuned to rebellion. At school, he met John Entwistle, another misfit drawn to music. They formed a short-lived jazz band called the Confederates, with Pete on banjo. But jazz didn't scream loud enough. Rock did. Soon they met Roger Daltrey. By 1962, Pete had joined the Detours, and within a year the name had changed to The Who. The band that would define a generation was born in a haze of sweaty clubs and smashed amplifiers. What made them different? Pete's guitar wasn't just an instrument. It was a weapon. He created feedback loops on purpose. He swung his arm in massive windmill motions, like a machine about to explode. He smashed his guitars on stage, not out of rage, but as performance art. Their first hit, I Can't Explain, introduced the world to their raw energy. Then came My Generation, an anthem that embodied youth disillusionment. Hope I Die Before I Get Old wasn't a lyric. It was a manifesto. Pete became The Who's chief songwriter and conceptual force. He didn't just write songs, he crafted sonic universes. But behind the power chords was something more introspective. He began following Meher Baba, an Indian spiritual master who spoke not with a voice, but with silence. This spiritual path birthed Tommy, the rock opera that fused trauma, religion, and redemption. Who else but Pete could turn personal scars into a full-blown operatic masterpiece? After Tommy, he kept pushing boundaries. Who's Next introduced synthesizers to rock radio. Quadrophenia became a sprawling meditation on identity, alienation, and working-class Britain. As the decades unfolded, tragedy struck. Keith Moon died in 1978. John Entwistle passed in 2002. But Pete carried on, sometimes solo, sometimes with Daltrey, always exploring new layers of music and meaning. And yet, through the fame, the noise, the smash hits, and the smashed guitars, there was always a part of Pete seeking silence, seeking space, seeking something the stage could never give him. Perhaps that's why he chose the house in Richmond. But before we walk through its quiet halls and sun-dappled gardens, we need to ask, what does a man who once electrified the world with rage and brilliance do with peace? Country house in Richmond, Greater London. From the roaring chaos of the Who's golden years, Pete Townshend eventually stepped into something far quieter. In 1996, he purchased a Georgian country house tucked inside Richmond, Greater London, a place where history, privacy, and English elegance converge. But what made this estate so irresistible to a man once surrounded by roaring crowds and exploding amplifiers? Let's walk through the gates and find out. The entrance is discreet. No flashy signs, no dramatic driveway. Just an aged iron gate wrapped in ivy, opening onto a winding path lined with elm trees. It feels less like a rock star's residence, and more like a portal into a Jane Austen novel. And then it appears. A stately red brick facade with symmetrical windows and tall chimneys, quintessentially Georgian, not ostentatious, but commanding, built to last, built to reflect thought, not shout luxury. The house sits on elevated land, offering sweeping views of the Thames and the surrounding meadows. As you step onto the porch, there's a stillness in the air. You can almost hear the chords of behind blue eyes drifting from within. Inside, the home unfolds like a memoir. The grand entrance hall is floored with black and white checkered marble, slightly worn from decades of footsteps, each one carrying stories. An antique coat rack, a framed concert poster from the 70s, a guitar, silent and leaning against a wall as if resting after a long life. The living room is a delicate blend of eras. Vintage leather armchairs face a stone fireplace that's seen more winters than records Pete has sold. Books line the walls, rows of Dostoevsky, Blake, and spiritual texts by Meher Baba. The air smells of wood polish and old paper, layered with quiet. To the right, the dining room bathes in natural light from arched windows. A long oak table stretches beneath a crystal chandelier, not grandiose but aged, like something passed through generations. This isn't a room for parties. It's a room for conversation, for journals left half open, for cups of tea with meaning. The kitchen is warm and rustic. Copper pans hang from hooks. Marble countertops meet handmade tiles. There's a radio on the windowsill, tuned low to classical or jazz. You can picture Pete here, barefoot, brewing tea, lost in a thought that might later become a lyric. Upstairs, the house grows more personal. Each bedroom reflects quiet taste. Linen sheets, soft palettes, bay windows catching the morning sun. But one room is different. It's the studio. Walls padded, amps arranged, notebooks stacked high on the desk. Dozens of guitars hang like silent guardians. There's no chaos here, just control. It's where songs begin, or where memories return. And then, outside, the garden stretches for acres, a blend of manicured hedges and wildflower rebellion. There are paths leading into the woods, down toward the river, into silence. A bench sits alone beneath a weeping willow. It's where Pete sometimes reads, or reflects. This house isn't a trophy. It's a sanctuary. It whispers of someone who once stood in front of 70,000 screaming fans but now values the hush of leaves rustling at dusk. It tells us that success doesn't always lead to mansions with marble fountains. Sometimes it leads you back to yourself. And Pete Townshend? He's found that self among these bricks, beams, and birdsong. If walls could talk, Pete Townshend's Richmond estate would speak in royalties. As of 2025, his net worth is estimated at $150 million. But this fortune didn't fall from the sky. It was carved from shattered guitars, thunderous stage dives, and an unwavering commitment to art. His first real breakthrough came not just from my generation, but from the sound itself. Pete was one of the first guitarists to experiment with distortion, feedback, and studio layering. These innovations didn't just make noise, they made money. The Who's legendary discography, from Tommy to Who's Next to Quadrophenia, continues to sell across vinyl, CD, streaming platforms, and collector's editions. Each reissue, each remaster, each film or series that dares to sync with Baba O'Reilly. It all adds up. And then came Broadway. When Tommy was adapted into a stage production in the early 90s, it didn't just entertain, it raked in millions. Pete, as the mind behind the music and concept, enjoyed a rare luxury in showbiz, creative control and financial reward. He also owns publishing rights through his company Eel Pie Publishing, named after the legendary Eel Pie Island, a London music haven. Every time a track is licensed for commercials, film, or covered by another artist, Pete earns a share. Add to that the proceeds from his books, Horse's Neck, a haunting collection of short stories, Who I Am, a best-selling memoir. Even his spiritual writings have found a niche readership that brings in steady income. And he's toured. Oh, how he's toured. Even well into his 70s, Townshend and Daltrey filled arenas. Those farewell tours? Each one grossed tens of millions. But what's most fascinating is how he lives with that fortune. No flashy headlines, no real estate flipping. Just one house, one space, and a lifestyle that reflects introspection more than indulgence. For Pete, wealth isn't about excess, it's about having the freedom to sit still. Philanthropy. Before he ever donated a single pound, Pete Townshend donated something far more intimate: his silence. In 1968, long before rock stars were expected to be charitable, Pete gave away his old London apartment. Not for money, not for status, but for faith. He handed the keys to the Meher Baba Society so the spiritual group could have a home base. No press release, no ceremony, just intention. It was the beginning of a lifelong relationship between music and meaning. Pete didn't just write songs, he used them to fund something larger. In 1969 and 1972, he quietly produced two rare albums, Happy Birthday and I Am, with proceeds going to the Baba Foundation. By 1976, the third album, With Love, followed. Eventually, these works were compiled into the limited edition Avatar, with 100% of proceeds supporting health clinics and schools in rural India. But his generosity didn't stop at borders. In 1974, Pete played his first solo concert not for a new album or tour, but to raise funds for the Camden Square Community Center. It set a tone for decades to come. He believed in direct action. When his plans to open a London rehab clinic with Dr. Meg Patterson fell through, Pete didn't walk away. He organized two Who concerts that raised £20,000 for Patterson's existing facility instead. And when heroin swept through Britain in the 80s, Pete didn't hide. He wrote public letters. He sold anti-drug t-shirts. He even funded rehab travel for fellow musicians like Topper Headon, the former drummer of The Clash. But perhaps no cause touched him as deeply as the well-being of children. In 1992, Pete's rock opera Tommy debuted at the La Jolla Playhouse in San Diego as a benefit for the Nordhoff Robbins Music Therapy Foundation, helping children with autism and learning disabilities. In the years that followed, he performed at major benefits: Paul Simon's Children's Health Fund, Neil Young's Bridge School, and the Maryville Academy in Chicago, for which he raised over $1.6 million through 5 separate shows. He didn't just sing, he paid attention. In 2000, The Who launched a series of concerts for Teenage Cancer Trust, with Pete as a core driving force. By 2011, he and Roger Daltrey had opened an entire wing, the Daltrey/Townshend Teen and Young Adult Cancer Program at UCLA in Los Angeles. And as recently as 2024, he donated a guitar to Mark Knopfler's re-release of Going Home, raising funds once again for the same cause. Still, when asked about his philanthropy, Pete doesn't speak with pride. He speaks with duty. Because for him, it's not charity, it's healing. The same way a guitar can scream truth, a dollar can whisper hope. And Pete? He's done both. quietly, profoundly, and with unwavering grace. He once smashed guitars to pieces. Now he spends his mornings sipping tea in silence. Pete Townshend's personal life, far removed from the wild mythology of The Who, has settled into something almost poetic. Personal life. After separating from his wife in 1994, he spent years quietly redefining what companionship meant. He kept the tabloids at bay. He kept his heart guarded. And then, Rachel Fuller entered. A composer, songwriter, and soul far more attuned to Pete's quieter rhythms. They shared music, then rooms, then dreams. In 2016, they married in secret. No fanfare, no headlines, just vows and stillness. Today, they live a life of chosen simplicity inside the Richmond estate. No late-night parties, no celebrity galas, just the occasional garden walk, a shared playlist echoing through the trees, a glance across the kitchen table that says more than words. Pete still writes, still plays, but there's no pressure now. Some days he picks up a guitar and strums for no one but himself. Other days, he walks into his study, opens a notebook, and lets memories pour out as prose instead of song. He reads Meher Baba's teachings before bed, sometimes Blake, sometimes Jung. He's fascinated with the nature of truth, not in the loud, disruptive way he once was, but in the subtle way a leaf trembles before it falls. And then there are the quiet rituals, a specific bench in the garden where he reflects, a favorite mug, a candle lit not for mood, but for meaning. Friends still visit, not many, but the right ones. Musicians, thinkers, old bandmates with stories too sacred for podcasts. And when they do, the music returns, not as performance, but as communion. They sit around the grand piano or pick up forgotten guitars and play for no one but each other. There's laughter, but also long silences. Because Pete, perhaps more than anyone, understands the power of both. He no longer lives in the shadow of The Who. He lives in his own light, smaller, softer, but no less brilliant. On most days, Pete rises with the sun. He doesn't need an alarm. The birds outside his Richmond window, the gentle hum of the river nearby, they wake him naturally. He pads softly across the wood floors, makes tea in the same old porcelain kettle, and stands by the window in his robe, watching. Some mornings he meditates, not with incense or elaborate chants, just breath, just stillness. Rachel often joins him later in the music room. They don't speak much early in the day. Instead, they sit at opposite ends of the grand piano, improvising melodies, sometimes unfinished, sometimes hauntingly whole. It's not for an audience. It's for alignment, for peace. And once a week, Pete writes letters, not emails, not messages. Handwritten letters to friends, former collaborators, young musicians who reached out and never expected a reply. He believes in legacy, but not the kind etched in stone. Legacy, for him, is made of fingerprints on old guitars, in advice quietly passed on, in a single sentence that makes someone feel seen. Evenings are sacred. Dinner is simple, vegetarian mostly, often cooked by Pete himself. He listens to vinyl records, not always his own. Sometimes Debussy, sometimes Leonard Cohen, sometimes silence. There's a stillness in this life, not a withdrawal from the world, but a reconnection to something deeper. A man who once shook stadiums now finds comfort in a quiet room filled with memories, music, and meaning. From smashed guitars to whispered prayers, Pete Townshend's life is a quiet sonata after the storm. Behind the walls of his English country home lies a story not of fame, but of peace hard won. Which part of his journey moved you the most? Leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories behind the music.